Right end of the neuron. The dendrite passes this way. You can see some cell bodies here. The axons then pass away from the cell bodies. And if you remember this picture here, this auditory nerve is formed by the axons of those neurons. All right, that's it for the ear. So now what I'm going to do is pull some spinal cord models over. So I'll just, almost knocked them all off. Set these down. And I'm going to first show you this nerve man. And I need my glasses for this part. So if you, again, cannot see some of these parts, just make sure you get a close-up view in class. All right, these nerves here, this is supposed to be showing the nervous system. You will have to pick out a few of these things, and all of that is listed in your study guide for class. Okay, this group of nerves and this group of nerves, I'll point it out on the left side of him. That's called the cervical plexus. Cervical plexus. This group of nerves in your armpit is called the brachial plexus. And off of the brachial plexus comes 5 nerves that will go down your arm, forearm, and hand. And you need to know what their names are. I don't know if you can see a little 20 here. That's supposed to be the axillary nerve. 21 is the musculocutaneous nerve. And then now what I'm going to do is shift over to his other side because these 2 bones are crossed on his left side. So I'm going to shift over here. Axillary nerve, musculocutaneous nerve. And then if you follow down into his forearm, they're pointing out this nerve as the radial nerve. Actually, in our forearm, it's on the back of our forearm. It should not be on the front like this, but that's where they put it on the model. They couldn't put something on the back. Anyway, that's supposed to be the radial nerve, but in your brain, put it on the back of the forearm. Then in the anterior forearm, the lateral nerve is supposed to be the median nerve, and then inside is the ulnar nerve, and those are the nerves of your forearm. Okay, here in the center, we've got the spinal cord going down the center. This yellow thing to the right is supposed to be the sympathetic trunk. All of these yellow nerves are supposed to be thoracic spinal nerves. If you go down to this group of nerves, all the way down here at the bottom is supposed to be the lumbosacral plexus. Off of the lumbosacral plexus comes some nerves you need to know. The nerve that goes inside to your adductor muscles is the obturator nerve. The one that goes forward onto the femur, also going to your quadriceps femoris muscle group, is the femoral nerve. And then the biggest nerve in the body is the sciatic nerve. It passes down behind your hamstring muscles. It splits at the popliteal fossa into a nerve going anterior in your leg, and that's called the common peroneal nerve, the one that goes anterior or forward in your leg. The nerve that goes backward or posterior in the leg is the tibial nerve. It's the tibial nerve. And that takes care of this one. So I'm going to move him out of the way and pick up 2 spinal cord models and a long spinal cord model that I will just hold. This spinal cord model is supposed to be showing you spinal nerves as they come out of the spinal cord. All these yellow things are supposed to be spinal nerves. So let me pick out a couple things before we get to those. This little artery that's in red is your vertebral artery or vertebral artery. Then, now let's go to the nerves. All of these nerves on both sides are in your neck. These are supposed to be the cervical spinal nerves. And they form the cervical plexus. These nerves, imagine them in your armpit, form brachial plexus. And those will eventually form nerves going down your arm and forearm into your hand. These nerves that don't form a plexus, show them to you from a lateral view, these are all called thoracic spinal nerves. They don't form a plexus. They go directly to the organs involved, like your intercostal muscles. Finally, if you see a bunch of nerves all the way down here, there's a lumbar plexus here, there's a sacral plexus here. Clinically, they usually combine these as the lumbosacral plexus, and both of those, in other words, if I were to ask you all of this together, that would be the lumbosacral plexus, made of the lumbar and the sacral plexus. Those form nerves that go down your leg. We just pointed them out. Obturator nerve, sciatic nerve, femoral nerves are the biggest ones in that group. One final thing before I set this down. Each of these spinal nerves has two parts. It has a ventral ramus, which is the thicker yellow wire on this model. That generally takes care of nerves going to and from the front of your body. This little nerve here is called the dorsal ramus. That actually goes to your back. And so the ventral ramus is half of the spinal nerve. The dorsal ramus is the other half of the spinal nerve. And now I'm going to set this down, and we'll have two more spinal cord models, and then the sheep brain. Okay, I'm going to show you this one first. This model is of a cross-section of the spinal cord. Normally, all of this would sit in the vertebral foramen of the vertebra. And just so you know what's front, what's back, this is anterior at the bottom of the board. This is posterior at the back of the board. So the body of the vertebra would be at the bottom of the board, and the spine of the vertebra would be at the back of the board. Okay, so let's just start on the outside and move our way in. This whole blue layer here is called the dura mater, or mater. That means tough mother. That's an outside tough meningeal layer. If you can see a very thin light gray lining that's the arachnoid layer. And then directly on top of the spinal cord, you cannot see it very well. In fact, they don't show it. But do know there is a layer there. On top of the spinal cord is the pia mater. And it goes and presses against the very outer part. Okay, there's a crease here called the anterior median fissure. Next to this dark blue, right in the center, is the posterior median sulcus. Then if you go into the spinal cord, all this blue stuff is normally gray matter, and it's divided into horns. This is the posterior horn that is pointed, and think posterior is pointed. There's a little bump on the side that you're probably having trouble seeing, but it's called the lateral horn. Right here in the front is the anterior horn. Crossing over is the gray commissure. There's a hole in the center of that called the central canal that holds cerebral spinal fluid. Right, generally sensory nerves come in at the back and motor nerves come out at the front. They call this whole section here the dorsal root. They call this whole thing the dorsal root. This round thing is called the dorsal root ganglion. This little piece coming back, if you can see it, is the dorsal ramus. Okay, all of this in the front is called the ventral root, and the thicker yellow thing that they're just barely showing here is the ventral ramus. So again, you have the dura mater in blue, the arachnoid in gray. I did not tell you the space yet. This black space is called the subarachnoid space, and it carries cerebral spinal fluid. The pia mater is on the direct surface of the spinal cord. Okay, and lastly on this one, both of these together would form one pair of spinal nerves. That would be one pair of spinal nerves out of 31 total pair. All right, if I show you this model, it's pretty much showing the spinal cord much, much smaller. You still have the anterior median fissure, the posterior median sulcus. You have, these little parts are hard to see, I'm sure, but I'll name them. You have the anterior horn, the lateral horn, and the posterior horn, the gray commissure going through the middle. This model mainly is to show you a couple of things that the other one did not. This shows you the bone wrapped around the spinal cord, and this is a cervical vertebra here. And it's also showing you a space that has yellow adipose tissue in it, and these little gray and red things are supposed to be blood vessels. Can you see that that space is also down here? This space is called the epidural space. They often put anesthetic in there if they're going to, for instance, give a woman an epidural block for deadening the feeling during pregnancy. And so this space, again, is called the epidural space. This is the dura mater here. The arachnoid is hard to see. This is the subarachnoid space here, and on top of the spinal cord all the way around is the pia mater. If you're trying to identify a couple other things, in the front you can barely see two pieces of the sympathetic trunk, part of the sympathetic nervous system. And if you're trying to identify this little round yellow thing off to the side, that's the dorsal root ganglion. Okay, finally we're going to show you the sheep brain. And yay, we're at the end. Okay, so I'm going to put on gloves and we'll see what we can see. I look so official. Okay, this is a sheep brain. As you can tell, sheep aren't very smart. Look at that tiny little brain. But anyway, they're very dumb animals. But anyway, we use their brain to show, we can get a hold of these brains easier than we don't want to donate our own brains, so we got a sheep brain here. And some of the parts are the same, and so I'll just point this out. This white layer is called the dura mater. You do need to know that. If you kind of peel that away, you'll see this shiny layer, which is, what I'm going to do is maybe tip it. I'm going to use this eye and tip this, and let's hope it doesn't fall off the table. All right, so this is the dura mater here. You peel that away, and you will see this shiny layer, which is the arachnoid and the pia mater together. Those little black things are blood vessels inside. There's some structures that if I turn this over, it's hard to see, but I'll point them out anyway because I want you to be looking for them in class. If you look for these little white structures here, those are optic nerves. Those are optic nerves with dura mater around them. This big bumpy thing kind of in the center, posterior to the optic nerves, is that sheep's pituitary gland. And right here, these usually get damaged, are the olfactory tracts. And back at the brain, I'm going to just, you guys can stay there, and I'm going to grab a piece of brain. I earlier told you that this is called the optic nerve. A better name for that is, olfactory nerve. I told you that was called the olfactory nerve. A better name for that is olfactory tract, because a tract does not have connective tissue wrapped around it. So the more correct name for that is olfactory tract. And back to this is actually the olfactory tract of the sheep brain. Many people just lapse and call it the olfactory nerve, though. All right, if you do a section, a mid-sagittal cut through here, in other words, this poor brain's kind of dry. It's been sitting under the lights. But if we were to make a cut through the median longitudinal fissure, we would get this kind of a cut. And the parts are not nearly as easily seen as in the human brain, but we're going to do the best we can. I think, again, if you start from the bottom and you work up, it works out a little better. Let me snap this so that I'm not cutting off my blood supply. Okay, down here is the spinal cord. If you can see that straight structure there. There's a bump right above it that's pretty tough to see, but that's the medulla. Maybe I can put it with a black background. Then if you pass from the medulla upward is the pons. Directly behind the pons is the cerebellum. Between the pons and the cerebellum is the fourth ventricle. And then if you come up forward, I'm going to pull down the cerebellum. And if I use my finger to pull it down, I don't know if you can see two bodies in here. I'm going to pull it down a little better. Okay, I'm pulling down the cerebellum. That bottom body is called the inferior colliculus. The top one is the superior colliculus. I'm going to let the cerebellum come back up. It usually covers the inferior. So what you can see here is the superior. All right, then in front of the superior colliculus, if we were a human, would be the cerebral aqueduct. In front of that is the cerebral peduncle. I know these parts are hard to see. You're going to have to find them in class. This little structure is called the pineal gland. It's always behind a round structure called the thalamus. This is the optic chiasm that looks white here. If I poke my probe inside this space, that's the lateral ventricle. This top thing is the corpus callosum. And see if we can see anything else. That's that olfactory tract. The optic nerve is gone here. So that's it. So that's it to the nervous system. I appreciate the help from Mike Petros and his friend Matt. And study hard and good luck. That hit. Oh, I'm tired.